The biting wind of a late New York winter cut through the bustling streets like an unforgiving reminder of the city's relentless pace. Chloe Hart tightened her worn wool coat around her as she stood behind the counter of Kane's Diner. A modest, no-frills eatery wedged between a laundromat and a pawnshop. Her fingers, red and chapped from ferrying plates of greasy eggs and watery coffee, betrayed the long hours she endured here. "Table 3 is waiting on their pancakes." "Hart," barked Richard Kane, the owner and Chloe's boss. His gruff voice carried more annoyance than urgency, a constant fixture of his personality. Richard, a middle-aged man with graying temples and a permanent scowl etched into his face, had long since traded kindness for the pursuit of keeping his diner afloat. Chloe offered a silent nod, grabbed the steaming plate, and made her way through the maze of mismatched tables. Despite the weariness tugging at her every step, her demeanor remained light. Her bright green eyes and faint smile carried a warmth the diner's peeling wallpaper couldn't replicate. Through the fogged glass window, Chloe noticed him again, Jackson Miller, a man who had become a familiar silhouette on the diner's stoop over the past few weeks. His ragged coat barely concealed the thin frame beneath, and his unkempt beard spoke of years on the streets. But it was his eyes, piercing, haunted, and hungry, that gripped her. He sat on the curb, gaze fixed on a table where a family shared a hearty breakfast. The laughter of children muffled by the glass. Chloe's heart clenched. She couldn't ignore it any longer. "Chloe, focus." Richard's voice snapped her out of her reverie. She quickly set down the pancakes at table 3, ignoring the dismissive grunt of the patron, and hurried back to the counter. "Break time?" Chloe asked, feigning casualness. Richard glared. "You know the drill. 5 minutes. And don't think about sneaking in extra coffee." Chloe didn't reply. Instead, she grabbed a plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and bacon, left untouched by a customer who'd walked out, and poured a fresh cup of coffee. Before she could second-guess herself, she pushed open the diner's door, the cold air biting her cheeks. Jackson's head lifted at the sound of her approach, his expression shifting from wary surprise to something softer, almost grateful. "I figured you might be hungry," Chloe said, placing the plate and coffee on the sidewalk beside him. She crouched down to meet his gaze. "It's not much, but it's warm." Jackson hesitated, his weathered hands trembling as they hovered over the food. I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "You don't have to," Chloe replied with a reassuring smile. The door swung open violently behind her. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Richard's voice thundered, silencing the quiet hum of the street. Chloe stood, her heart racing as she turned to face him. You're just giving away food we can't afford to waste." Richard interrupted, his face red with fury. He stepped closer, his tone dropping to a menacing whisper. "Do you think this is some charity? Do you know how tight our margins are? You want to ruin me?" Chloe held her ground, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "He's hungry, Richard. No one should have to sit out here and watch other people eat when they've got nothing." Richard's laugh was bitter, almost cruel. "You think the world cares about your bleeding heart? If you're so desperate to help, do it on your own dime. You're fired." The words hit her like a slap. But Chloe didn't flinch. She turned to Jackson, who sat frozen, his hand clutching the coffee cup as if it were a lifeline. "It's okay," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "It's okay." As Richard stormed back inside, Chloe felt the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders. She crouched back down beside Jackson, her voice wavering only slightly. "Eat up, okay? And if you're ever ready to share your story, I'm here." Jackson nodded, his eyes glassy. "You've done more for me in 5 minutes than anyone has in 5 years," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Chloe straightened, her resolve hardening with each step away from the diner. The cold bit at her exposed face, but it couldn't match the fire in her chest. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew one thing: she wouldn't regret choosing kindness, no matter the cost. Chloe found herself at a nearby park later that day, her breath visible in the crisp winter air. The weight of her firing hadn't fully settled yet. She had acted on impulse, guided by a conviction stronger than the looming fear of uncertainty. She needed time to think. But more than that, she needed to check on Jackson. She spotted him sitting on a bench under a skeletal tree, his coat wrapped tightly around him. The plate she had given him was empty. the coffee cup resting beside him like a small token of comfort. He looked up as she approached, his expression a mix of gratitude and curiosity. "You didn't have to do that," Jackson said, his voice tinged with guilt. "Maybe not," Chloe replied, sitting down beside him, "but I wanted to, and I think, maybe you need it more than I need that job." Jackson let out a short, humorless laugh. "Pretty high price to pay for a stranger." "You're not just a stranger," she said softly. "You're a person, and no one deserves to be treated like they're invisible." They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the city muffled by the park's relative calm. Finally, Jackson spoke, his voice halting as if he hadn't shared his story in years. "I wasn't always like this. You know," he began, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I used to be someone. Jackson Miller, sergeant in the U.S. Army. 20 years of service. I had a wife, Melissa, and a daughter, Gracie." Chloe listened intently, sensing the pain in every word. "It was Afghanistan, 3rd deployment. My unit hit an IED. I survived, but not all of us did. When I came back, something inside me didn't." He paused, his hands gripping the bench. "Melissa tried to help me. God, she tried, but I couldn't shake it. The nightmares, the anger. I was like a bomb waiting to go off." Jackson's voice cracked, and he took a moment to collect himself. "She left eventually, took Gracie with her, said she couldn't let me drag them down. And she was right." His eyes glistened as he continued. "I lost the house, the job, everything, and now, here I am." Chloe felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to say something, anything, but words felt insufficient. Instead, she placed a hand gently on his arm. "Jackson, you're not beyond saving," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion swelling in her chest. "You've been through hell, but that doesn't mean you have to stay there. Let me help you." He turned to her, his eyes searching hers for something, sincerity, maybe, or hope. Whatever he saw, it seemed to steady him. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted. "We'll figure it out," Chloe said firmly. Together, that evening, Chloe returned to her small apartment, the adrenaline of the day fading into a gnawing sense of uncertainty. Rent was due in 2 weeks. And without the job at Kane's Diner, she had no way to pay it. She glanced at her phone, hesitating before dialing her best friend, Sam Price, a sharp-witted journalist who always seemed to know what to do. "Chloe, you're crazy, you know that?" Sam said after hearing the story. "But in the best way. Crazy doesn't pay the bills." Chloe replied with a weak laugh. "Look," Sam said, her tone softening, "what you did, it matters. And people need to hear about it. Let me write a piece. Maybe it'll get you some attention, some support." Chloe hesitated. She didn't want to turn Jackson's pain into a spectacle. But Sam's voice carried a persuasive certainty. "Okay," Chloe said finally, "but keep the focus on the bigger picture. It's not just about me or Jackson. It's about how we treat people." The next morning, Chloe met Jackson at the park again, this time armed with a notepad and a plan. "First things first," she said, "we need to get you somewhere warm. There's a shelter a few blocks from here. I'll walk with you." Jackson nodded, though his expression betrayed a mix of hope and skepticism. As they made their way through the bustling streets, Chloe felt the stares of passers-by. Some looked at Jackson with pity, others with disdain. It fueled her resolve. When they reached the shelter, the staff welcomed Jackson warmly, their compassion a stark contrast to the indifference he'd grown used to. Chloe stayed with him through the intake process, her presence a steady anchor in the storm. That evening, Chloe received a call from Sam. "The article's live," she said, "and it's already getting traction. People are sharing it like crazy." Chloe opened the link Sam sent, her heart racing as she read the headline, "One meal, one act of kindness. How a fired waitress is changing lives." The accompanying photo of Chloe handing the plate to Jackson captured a moment she hadn't realized was so powerful. Comments flooded in beneath the article, a mix of praise, skepticism, and anger. But amidst the noise, one stood out. "How can I help? Let me know where to donate." It was a small flicker of light in a world that often felt dark. And for the first time in a long while, Chloe felt something she hadn't dared to feel: hope. By the next morning, Chloe's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts, calls, and notifications piled up, each one more bewildering than the last. What started as a quiet act of kindness had erupted into a wildfire of public attention. She scrolled through her social media feed, her stomach twisting. The article Sam had written was being shared by local news outlets, influencers, and even a few celebrities. The caption, "Compassion shouldn't cost your job," trended alongside the story. Comments poured in from strangers. Chloe Hart is a hero. About time someone stood up for the homeless. This is why small businesses struggle. You can't just give away free food. Chloe rubbed her temples, torn between gratitude for the support and frustration at the backlash. A sharp knock at her apartment door startled her. She opened it to find Samantha. Her face lit with excitement. "Chloe, it's crazy out there," Sam said, stepping inside. "I mean, look at this." She held up her phone, showing a video that had gone viral. Chloe handing Jackson the plate. The confrontation with Richard playing out in raw, unedited detail. "Someone recorded it?" Chloe's voice trembled. "Yeah, and people are eating it up. You've got half the city calling you a saint and the other half debating whether Richard should have fired you." Meanwhile, at Kane's diner, Richard Kane was pacing in his office, the small television blaring with yet another news segment about Chloe, the young waitress fired for feeding a homeless veteran. The anchor said, as the screen showed a clip of the now infamous confrontation. Richard turned it off with a growl, muttering to himself, "Ruined my reputation. That's what she's done." He opened his laptop, scrolling through scathing Yelp reviews and angry emails. His diner was losing customers by the hour. Some accused him of heartlessness. Others defended him for trying to stay afloat in a tough economy. In frustration, Richard slammed the laptop shut and grabbed his phone. He dialed the number of his lawyer, Grant Hargrove, a sharp, calculating man known for his ruthless tactics. "Grant," Richard barked, "we're going to sue her. Defamation, loss of revenue, the whole 9 yards." Grant's voice was calm and methodical. "Let's not act rashly, Richard. If we're going to take this to court, we need to gather evidence that Chloe acted maliciously. Otherwise, this will backfire." Richard gritted his teeth. "She's already ruined me. I want her to pay." Elsewhere, Chloe sat with Jackson at the shelter's cafeteria. They were surrounded by people who, like Jackson, had been overlooked by the city's hustle. "Did you see all this?" Chloe asked, showing Jackson the article and the viral video on her phone. Jackson looked at the screen, his expression a mix of awe and discomfort. "You didn't sign up for this, Chloe. All I did was sit on that stoop. And all I did was hand you a plate of food," Chloe said. "But look what it started. People are talking. They're paying attention." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the cafeteria door. A woman in a tailored navy suit entered, her confident stride immediately drawing attention. "Chloe Hart?" the woman asked, her gaze landing on Chloe. "Yes?" Chloe stood, unsure what to expect. The woman extended her hand. "I'm Margaret Bennett, Mayor of New York City. I've been following your story, and I wanted to meet you personally." Jackson's eyes widened as Chloe shook the mayor's hand. The three sat at a nearby table, the mayor's presence commanding respect but exuding warmth. "Chloe, what you did for Mr. Miller here is remarkable," Bennett said. "It's rare to see someone act with such selflessness in a city like ours." "I just did what felt right," Chloe said, "and that's exactly why I'm here. Your story has sparked a conversation, one that's long overdue. We have too many veterans and homeless individuals falling through the cracks. I'd like to introduce you to a nonprofit organization called Hope Horizon. They provide support for people like Jackson, housing, medical care, job training." Jackson shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not a charity case," he muttered. "You're not," Chloe said gently, placing a hand on his. "But maybe they can help you find your footing again." Mayor Bennett nodded. "This isn't about pity, Mr. Miller. It's about giving people the resources they need to reclaim their lives." Chloe looked at Jackson, her expression hopeful. "What do you think?" After a long pause, Jackson sighed. "If it's with you, Chloe, I'll try." That evening, Chloe returned home to find her inbox flooded with interview requests. News anchors, talk shows, and podcasters wanted to hear her side of the story. But amid the support, there were threats and insults. "You're a bleeding heart ruining small businesses. Why don't you take in all the homeless if you care so much?" Chloe's phone rang, and she answered without checking the caller ID. "Chloe Hart?" a cold, unfamiliar voice said. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Grant Hargrove, representing Richard Kane. Consider this your formal notification of a lawsuit for defamation and damages to Kane's Diner." The line went dead, leaving Chloe stunned. Chloe sat on her couch, the phone still in her hand. The glow of her viral fame had quickly turned into something much darker. She thought of Jackson, of the shelter, of the mayor's offer. Despite the fear creeping into her chest, one thought remained clear. This wasn't just about her anymore. If Richard wanted a fight, he was going to get one. The day after Chloe received the lawsuit notice, she sat in the small, bustling offices of Hope Horizon, the nonprofit organization Mayor Bennett had introduced her to. Sunlight filtered through the narrow windows, casting a warm glow over the stacks of files, buzzing phones, and the determined faces of staff members working tirelessly to assist those in need. A woman approached, her steps brisk yet welcoming. "You must be Chloe Hart," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Ava Clark, the director here. Margaret told me about you." Chloe shook Ava's hand, feeling both nervous and hopeful. "It's nice to meet you. Thank you for letting me come here." Ava smiled. "Thank you for inspiring a movement. People like you remind us why we do what we do." As Ava gave Chloe a tour, the weight of the space hit her. Each room told a story, walls lined with photographs of smiling veterans who had regained their lives. Charts documenting the number of meals served, job placements secured, and lives changed. Chloe could feel the gravity of what she was stepping into. And for the first time since losing her job, she felt a spark of purpose. Jackson sat in one of the consultation rooms, his hands fidgeting as he answered questions from a caseworker. Chloe stood outside, watching through the small glass pane in the door. She could see his discomfort, his wariness. Ava appeared beside her. "He's lucky to have you," she said. "I think I'm the lucky one," Chloe replied. When Jackson emerged, he seemed lighter, though still guarded. They're gonna help me get some medical care," he said, his voice soft. "Said there's a place I can stay, too, at least for a while." Chloe smiled, fighting back tears. "That's amazing, Jackson. It's a start." He nodded, his eyes searching hers. "Only because of you." That evening, Chloe sat with Ava in her office, discussing how she could get involved with the organization. "You've got a unique voice," Ava said. "Your story resonates with people. We'd love for you to help with outreach, connecting with donors. Speaking at events." Chloe hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for that. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just couldn't look away." "That's exactly why you're the right person," Ava said firmly. "People connect with authenticity. They want to see someone who cares because it's the right thing to do, not because they're trying to look good." Chloe nodded, her resolve hardening. "Okay, I'll do it." But as she left Hope Horizon that night, a nagging thought crept into her mind. Could she handle the pressure of being a public figure for a cause? Meanwhile, Richard Kane was on the offensive. His lawyer, Grant Hargrove, had filed the lawsuit, and the media frenzy surrounding it was growing. Richard gave an exclusive interview to a local news station, painting himself as the victim. "This is about fairness," he said, his voice stern. "I run a small business. Every penny counts." What Chloe did, it wasn't charity. It was theft. The segment was met with mixed reactions. Supporters of Richard's stance argued that Chloe had no right to give away resources that weren't hers, while others decried him as heartless. Chloe watched the interview from her small apartment, her stomach twisting with anger and fear. She knew she needed legal help, but her savings were meager, and lawyers didn't come cheap. The next day, Chloe walked into the law office of Ethan Reynolds, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney recommended by Ava. Ethan sat behind a cluttered desk, his piercing blue eyes sizing her up as she entered. "You're the viral waitress," he said, motioning for her to sit. "That's me," Chloe said, her voice steady despite her nerves. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "You've got a tough case. Defamation suits like this can get messy, especially when the other side has money to burn." "Why should I take it?" Chloe hesitated, then met his gaze. "Because this isn't just about me. It's about standing up for what's right. If we let people like Richard silence people who care, what does that say about us?" Ethan studied her for a moment, then smirked. "You're passionate. I'll give you that. So, will you help me?" Ethan sighed, leaning forward. "I'll take the case, but fair warning, this won't be easy. Richard's going to dig up everything he can to discredit you." Chloe nodded. "I'm not afraid of him." In the weeks that followed, Chloe threw herself into her work at Hope Horizon. She helped organize donation drives, spoke at small events, and shared Jackson's story, always with his permission, hoping to inspire others. Jackson, meanwhile, began to thrive. He attended therapy sessions and started rebuilding his confidence. One day, he surprised Chloe by showing up at an event to speak alongside her. "When I met Chloe, I didn't think anyone cared about people like me," he said to the small crowd. "But she proved me wrong. And now, I want to prove to myself that I can get back on my feet." The audience erupted in applause. And Chloe felt a swell of pride. But the lawsuit loomed like a dark cloud. Richard's legal team began spreading rumors about Chloe, claiming she had a history of insubordination and dishonesty. Ethan worked tirelessly to build a case, uncovering inconsistencies in Richard's financial records and testimony. He also dug into Richard's history, finding evidence of unethical practices at the diner, including wage theft and discriminatory hiring policies. Richard's no saint. Ethan told Chloe during one late-night meeting, "If we play this right, we can turn the tables." Chloe's determination grew with every setback. She knew the battle ahead would be grueling. But she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Jackson, for the people at Hope Horizon, and for everyone who believed in compassion over profit. The morning began with another knock on Chloe's door. She opened it to find Ethan Reynolds standing there, holding a folder thick with documents. His usual cool demeanor was replaced with something sharper, more urgent. "Chloe," he said as he stepped inside, "Richard's team just filed for a preliminary hearing. They're trying to expedite this lawsuit." "Expedite?" Chloe asked, her voice tinged with worry. Ethan nodded. "They're hoping to overwhelm you before we have a chance to properly prepare." Classic bully tactic. Chloe sat down heavily, her mind racing. The weight of the lawsuit, her growing role at Hope Horizon, and the media attention were beginning to press on her like a vice. "Do we have a chance?" she asked. Ethan smirked. "A good chance. Richard's case is weaker than it looks. But we'll have to work fast. He's betting you'll crumble under pressure." Chloe straightened, her resolve hardening. "I won't." As the court date approached, Richard's team began leaking damaging information to the press. Reports surfaced claiming Chloe had a history of trouble at previous jobs, including accusations of being unreliable. One particularly scathing article featured an anonymous source claiming Chloe had stolen tips from coworkers. "None of this is true," Chloe said, slamming the article onto Ethan's desk during the meeting. Ethan glanced over the article, unimpressed. "They're grasping at straws. Their goal isn't to prove these things, it's to make you look bad. Don't take the bait." "But people will believe it," Chloe said, frustration rising in her voice. "Not if we stay ahead of it," Ethan replied. "Let them dig. The more dirt they throw, the more likely they'll slip up." While Chloe grappled with the fallout, Jackson began to step out of his comfort zone. He had secured part-time work helping other veterans at Hope Horizon and had even started mentoring a younger man named Luis, a recent veteran struggling with PTSD. One evening, Jackson found Chloe in the Hope Horizon office, staring at her phone, her expression tight. "Rough day?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "You could say that," Chloe replied, showing him the latest headlines. Jackson frowned as he read. "This is garbage. None of this is who you are. Try telling that to the internet," Chloe muttered. Jackson hesitated, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "You stood up for me when I didn't even believe in myself. Let me stand up for you." Chloe looked at him, her eyes welling with gratitude. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived, the courtroom bustling with reporters and spectators eager for drama. Chloe sat at the defendant's table beside Ethan, trying to ignore the cameras flashing in her face. At the opposing table, Richard sat with Grant Hargrove, his lawyer, who exuded an air of smug confidence. The judge, an older woman with a stern demeanor, entered the room, and the hearing began. Grant wasted no time, painting Chloe as an impulsive employee who had caused irreparable harm to Richard's business. Ms. Hart's reckless actions led to a social media firestorm. Grant argued, "My client has faced financial losses, public humiliation, and undue stress, all because Ms. Hart decided she was above the rules." Ethan responded with calm precision. "Your Honor, this lawsuit is nothing more than a retaliation tactic. Mr. Kane's alleged losses are unsubstantiated, and his history of questionable business practices raises serious doubts about his motives." The judge frowned, her gaze shifting between the two parties. We'll need more evidence to determine the validity of these claims. For now, I'm setting a trial date. Chloe exhaled, both relieved and anxious. The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. After the hearing, Ethan ramped up his investigation into Richard's diner. He uncovered testimonies from former employees who described exploitative conditions, unpaid overtime, withheld tips, and even discriminatory practices against minority workers. One former employee, Maria Alvarez, agreed to speak publicly. "I worked for Richard for 3 years," Maria told Ethan during an interview. "He'd dock our pay for tiny mistakes and threatened to fire us if we complained." Chloe wasn't the problem, he was. Maria's story added fuel to the fire. And Ethan began building a case to counter Richard's claims. Meanwhile, Chloe's supporters grew louder. Hope Horizon organized a community rally in her honor, drawing attention to the broader issue of homelessness and the treatment of frontline workers. Jackson, now more confident than ever, spoke at the rally. "I wouldn't be here today if Chloe Hart hadn't seen me as more than just another homeless man," he said, his voice steady. "She didn't just give me a meal, she gave me hope. And now, it's our turn to stand by her." The crowd erupted in applause, their energy infectious. Chloe stood on the sidelines, tears streaming down her face as she watched Jackson inspire others. The rally proved to be a turning point. Richard, angered by the growing public support for Chloe, made a critical error. During a heated interview, he let slip a comment that revealed his discriminatory hiring policies. Ethan wasted no time. He secured the interview footage as evidence, knowing it would be a powerful tool in court. "Richard just handed us a gift," Ethan told Chloe during a late-night strategy meeting. "Do you think it'll be enough?" Chloe asked, exhaustion evident in her voice. Ethan's smirk returned. "It's a start. And trust me, when this goes to trial, we're going to make sure the truth comes out." Though the road ahead remained uncertain, Chloe felt a renewed sense of purpose. With Jackson by her side, Ethan in her corner, and a growing community rallying behind her, she began to believe that justice wasn't just a lofty ideal, it was a fight worth having. As she prepared for the battle ahead, one thought stayed with her: kindness might have cost her a job, but it had given her something far more valuable, a reason to fight. The lawsuit against Chloe consumed the public discourse. Each day, headlines shifted between portraying her as a compassionate hero and an impulsive worker who endangered her employer's livelihood. The dual narratives placed an enormous burden on her shoulders. Chloe spent her evenings preparing with Ethan, poring over documents, witness testimonies, and evidence. The preliminary hearing had only been the beginning. The trial promised to be an all-out war. "This is about more than just me and Richard now," Chloe said during one late-night meeting. "People are looking at this as a fight for basic humanity versus profit. And that's exactly why Richard's going to come at you with everything he has." Ethan warned, "We need to stay focused and one step ahead." Behind the scenes, Richard Kane was feeling the heat. The backlash from his public misstep about discriminatory hiring had spooked his investors and led to a deeper probe into his business practices. Grant Hargrove, Richard's lawyer, sat across from him in the dimly lit office of Kane's diner. His tone measured but firm. "You've got skeletons in your closet, Richard," Grant said. "If the other side finds them before we can clean them up, we're toast." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "I'm not going to let her win. That woman humiliated me, turned my diner into a circus. Which is why you need to listen to me," Grant replied, his voice cold. "The best defense is a strong offense. We're going to dig into her past, find anything we can use to discredit her." Richard leaned back, a sinister grin forming. "Do it, and make sure she regrets ever crossing me." As Chloe and Ethan prepared for the trial, an unexpected email arrived in Ethan's inbox. The sender was Maria Alvarez, the former employee who had spoken out against Richard. But this time, Maria had new information. "I think you need to see this," Ethan said, handing Chloe a printed copy of Maria's email. Chloe read it aloud. "I worked for Richard Kane for 3 years. He kept a second set of books for the diner, one for taxes, one for himself. He was hiding money, evading taxes. If you subpoena the financial records, you'll find everything you need." Chloe's eyes widened. "Do you think it's true?" Ethan nodded. "It fits. I've suspected something was off with his finances for a while. This could be the nail in his coffin." "But will Maria testify?" Chloe asked. "I'll convince her," Ethan said confidently. While Ethan pursued Maria's lead, Chloe continued her work with Hope Horizon. The nonprofit had become a refuge for her, a place where she felt her actions truly mattered. During a staff meeting, Ava Clark announced a new initiative, a legal fund for homeless individuals and workers facing retaliation. Inspired by Chloe's case, we want to help people like you. Chloe, Ava said, her voice filled with conviction. Your fight is shining a light on a broken system. And we need to build on that momentum. Jackson, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood and addressed the room. I used to think people like Chloe didn't exist. He said, she saw me when no one else did. And now, it's my turn to see her. Whatever it takes, I'm in. The room erupted in applause. The energy palpable. For the first time in weeks, Chloe felt a sense of hope. Ethan successfully subpoenaed Richard's financial records. And the results were damning. The documents revealed a carefully constructed scheme to evade taxes and underreport earnings. This is it, Ethan said, spreading the documents across his desk. Not only does this prove Richard's dishonesty, but it also undermines his entire claim of financial loss. Chloe stared at the evidence, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over her. So, what happens now? Now, Ethan said, we use this to destroy his credibility in court. Despite Ethan's confidence, Maria Alvarez remained hesitant about testifying. She met with Chloe in a quiet cafe, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her coffee cup. I want to help, Maria said, her voice shaky. But Richard, he's ruthless. If I go against him, he'll come after me. Chloe reached across the table, her eyes earnest. Maria, I know it's scary, but think about the people he's hurt, the people he'll keep hurting if we don't stop him. You have the power to make a difference. Maria looked away, tears brimming in her eyes. After a long silence, she nodded. I'll do it. I'll testify. As news of Richard's fraudulent activities began to surface, public opinion shifted decisively in Chloe's favor. Social media erupted with calls for justice, and news outlets began investigating Richard's broader business practices. Richard, now cornered, doubled down on his defense, appearing on a morning news program to plead his case. This is a smear campaign, Richard said, his voice shaking with barely concealed rage. I've run an honest business for years. Chloe Hart and her supporters are out to ruin me. But the public wasn't buying it. Comments flooded in beneath the segment. You call exploiting your workers honest? Sounds like karma to me. Time for Richard to face the music. The night before the trial, Chloe sat in her apartment, reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. The fear and uncertainty still lingered, but they were overshadowed by a newfound sense of purpose. Jackson stopped by, carrying a steaming cup of coffee. Thought you could use this, he said, handing it to her. Thanks, Chloe said, smiling. You ready for tomorrow? He asked. Chloe nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. But I'm not just fighting for me anymore. This is for everyone who's ever been silenced, ignored, or treated like they don't matter. Jackson raised his cup. Then let's win this thing. As the sun rose over New York City, Chloe walked into the courthouse with her head held high. The crowd outside buzzed with anticipation, reporters shouting questions as cameras flashed. Beside her, Ethan carried a briefcase filled with evidence that could turn the tide. Inside, the courtroom was packed, the tension palpable. Chloe glanced at Richard, whose face was a mask of anger and desperation. As the judge called the trial to order, Chloe took a deep breath. The fight for justice had begun. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers and the occasional murmur from the packed gallery. Chloe sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart pounding as the judge entered. All rise, the bailiff announced, and the room stood as the judge, an older woman with an air of no-nonsense authority, took her seat. Good morning, the judge began, her sharp gaze sweeping the room. We're here to determine the merits of Kane versus Hart. Counsel, you may proceed. Richard sat at his table, his expression a mix of anger and smug confidence. Grant Hargrove stood and began his opening statement, painting Chloe as an impulsive and reckless employee whose actions had irreparably damaged Richard's business. Ethan followed with his opening argument, focusing on Chloe's act of kindness and Richard's pattern of unethical behavior. He laid the groundwork for the defense, hinting at the evidence and witnesses that would soon come to light. Grant wasted no time attacking Chloe's character. Ms. Hart, He began during cross-examination. You admit that you gave away food that wasn't yours to give. Correct? I gave food to a man who was starving. Chloe replied, her voice steady despite the pressure. That's not what I asked. Grant said, leaning in. Did you or did you not take food without permission? Chloe hesitated. Yes, I did. But, Grant cut her off. No further questions. The prosecution then called witnesses, including a former employee who had been coerced into testifying that Chloe had a history of insubordination. Ethan leaned toward Chloe as the witness stepped down. Don't let it rattle you, he whispered. Their case is all smoke and mirrors. When it was Ethan's turn, he introduced evidence from the financial records. Your Honor, Ethan said, holding up a set of documents. These records show that Mr. Kane kept 2 sets of books for Kane's Diner, one for taxes and one to conceal unreported income. This not only undermines his claim of financial loss but also raises questions about his integrity. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the judge examined the documents. Grant stood, his expression tight. Objection. These records are irrelevant to the case at hand. Overruled, the judge said firmly. The defense may continue. Ethan pressed on, calling Maria Alvarez to the stand. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she was sworn in, but her voice grew steadier as she spoke. I worked for Richard Kane for 3 years. She began. He underpaid us, docked our wages for minor mistakes, and kept a second set of books to hide his real profits. Grant attempted to discredit her. Ms. Alvarez, isn't it true that you were terminated for poor performance? Maria straightened, her voice resolute. I was terminated because I questioned why my paycheck was short every week. Richard didn't like being challenged. Ethan followed with a line of questioning that highlighted Maria's courage and integrity, leaving a strong impression on the jury. The next witness was Jackson, who had insisted on testifying despite his nerves. As he took the stand, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Miller, Ethan began, can you tell the court what happened the day you met Ms. Hart? Jackson nodded, his voice steady. I was sitting outside the diner, hungry and cold. Chloe brought me food and coffee. She didn't have to, she wanted to. Ethan continued, how has that act of kindness impacted your life? Jackson's voice cracked slightly. It gave me hope. Chloe didn't just feed me, she treated me like I mattered. Because of her, I got the help I needed to turn my life around. Grant's cross-examination was sharp but failed to shake Jackson's resolve. Isn't it true, Grant sneered, that you've been homeless for years? How can the court rely on the testimony of someone in your position? Jackson met Grant's gaze, his voice firm, because I'm telling the truth. The final blow to Richard's case came when Ethan revealed a recording of Richard's discriminatory hiring policies. The audio, obtained from a former employee, featured Richard explicitly stating his refusal to hire certain groups of people. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, the evidence painting Richard not only as unethical but also prejudiced. Your Honor, Ethan said, this recording demonstrates a pattern of behavior that speaks directly to Mr. Kane's credibility, or lack thereof. The judge nodded, her expression grave. The recording is admissible. Grant's closing argument attempted to salvage Richard's case, but the weight of the evidence against him was evident. Ethan's closing statement, however, was a powerful call to justice. This case is about more than a meal, Ethan said. It's about standing up to a system that values profits over people. Chloe Hart's act of kindness revealed the cracks in that system, and it's time to hold those responsible accountable. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their decision. The foreperson stood, her voice clear. We find in favor of the defendant, Chloe Hart. Relief and joy washed over Chloe as the courtroom erupted in applause. Ethan clapped her on the back, and Jackson grinned from the gallery. Richard slumped in his seat, the weight of defeat visible on his face. As Chloe left the courthouse, reporters swarmed her, shouting questions and congratulations. She paused, her voice strong despite the exhaustion. This isn't just my victory, she said. It's a victory for everyone who believes in kindness, fairness, and standing up for what's right. We have to do better, for each other and for our communities. The crowd erupted into cheers. And for the first time in weeks, Chloe felt a sense of peace. That evening, she returned to Hope Horizon, where Jackson and the staff had prepared a small celebration. As they raised their glasses in a toast, Chloe realized that while her journey had been difficult, it had also been worth it. Because in the end, Kindness had triumphed, and it always would. The morning after the trial, Chloe woke to sunlight streaming through her apartment window. For the first time in weeks, she felt the absence of a heavy weight on her shoulders. The lawsuit was over, justice had prevailed, and the city seemed to exhale with her. Her phone buzzed incessantly, messages from supporters, updates from media outlets, and a flood of emails. She smiled, scrolling through them, pausing at one particularly heartfelt message. "Thank you for standing up for what's right. People like you give me hope for a better world." Chloe took a deep breath, realizing that her journey wasn't over. Winning the trial was just the beginning. Meanwhile, Richard Kane's world was crumbling. The trial had exposed his unethical practices, and the fallout was swift. Tax authorities launched an investigation into his finances, and former employees came forward with additional complaints of wage theft and harassment. Grant Hargrove, Richard's lawyer, had quietly distanced himself after the verdict, leaving Richard to face the consequences alone. One morning, Richard sat in the empty diner, his face a mask of defeat as he stared at the "closed" sign on the door. The tables were empty, the once bustling kitchen silent. As he looked around, a pang of regret hit him, not just for his actions but for the choices that had led him here. To Richard's surprise, the doorbell jingled, and Chloe stepped inside. She looked around the empty diner, her expression unreadable. "I heard you were closing," she said softly. Richard snorted, his voice bitter. "Guess you came to gloat." "No," Chloe replied. "I came to talk." She sat across from him, her gaze steady. "You made mistakes, Richard, big ones, but this doesn't have to be the end for you." Richard looked at her, incredulous. "After everything I did to you, why would you care?" "Because I still believe people can change," Chloe said simply. "You have a chance to make things right. Take it." For a moment, Richard said nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Chloe threw herself back into her work at Hope Horizon, which had seen an influx of donations and support following the trial. Ava Clark, the organization's director, beamed as she showed Chloe the newly renovated community center, funded by the surge in contributions. "This is because of you," Ava said. "No," Chloe replied, shaking her head. "It's because people care. I just gave them a reason to show it." Jackson had also found his stride. He had taken on a full-time role at the center, mentoring other veterans and organizing outreach programs. One afternoon, he approached Chloe with a proposal. "I want to start a program for vets like me," he said. "Job training, counseling, the whole package. I've been there. I know what they need." Chloe smiled. "Let's make it happen." The impact of Chloe's story continued to ripple through the community. Inspired by her actions, local businesses began offering meals to homeless individuals, and advocacy groups pushed for better protections for service workers. Even Mayor Margaret Bennett took action, proposing a citywide initiative to support veterans and combat homelessness. During a press conference, the mayor praised Chloe. "Her courage reminds us that one person's actions can spark a movement. We owe it to people like Chloe and Jackson to do better as a city." Despite the positive changes, Chloe struggled with the idea of becoming a public figure. Invitations to speak at events poured in, and she felt torn between her desire to stay grounded and the opportunity to make a larger impact. One evening, she confided in Jackson. "I'm not sure I'm cut out for this," she admitted. "I just wanted to do the right thing, not become some kind of spokesperson." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "You got a voice people listen to, Chloe. That's a gift, but you don't have to do it alone. Lean on the people who believe in you." His words stayed with her, and slowly, she began to embrace her new role. Weeks later, Chloe received a surprising call. It was Richard. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice hesitant. "I'm selling the diner, but I want the proceeds to go to Hope Horizon. It's the least I can do." Chloe was stunned. "Richard, that's incredible. It's not enough to undo what I've done," he said, "but maybe it's a start." At a community event celebrating Hope Horizon's successes, Chloe stood on stage, flanked by Jackson, Ava, and other staff members. The crowd was filled with familiar faces, supporters, veterans, and even Maria Alvarez, who had become an advocate for workers' rights. As Chloe spoke, her voice was strong and clear. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about us, about what we can achieve when we stand together. When we refuse to look away from injustice, and when we choose kindness over indifference." The crowd erupted in applause. And as Chloe stepped down, Jackson handed her a small plaque. It read, "In honor of courage and compassion." That night, as Chloe walked home, she reflected on how far she had come. Her life had changed in ways she never imagined. But she felt at peace. Because she had learned something powerful. Even the smallest act of kindness could create a wave of change. And that wave could transform not just one life, but an entire community. Months passed, and Chloe's life took on a new rhythm, though she still missed the simplicity of her days at Kane's Diner. Her work at Hope Horizon had become her calling. The organization's outreach programs flourished, helping countless veterans and homeless individuals find stability. Jackson's proposed program for veterans, named Second Chance Initiative, launched with fanfare. It offered job training, therapy, and mentorship, quickly becoming one of Hope Horizon's most successful endeavors. Jackson was at the forefront, his story inspiring others to believe that change was possible. "None of this would have happened without you," Jackson told Chloe during the program's opening ceremony. "It happened because you believed in yourself." Chloe replied, "I just gave you a little nudge." True to his word, Richard sold the diner and donated the proceeds to Hope Horizon. Though he kept a low profile, he occasionally reached out to check on the organization's progress. One day, Richard visited the community center. He was greeted by Ava, who hesitated before leading him to Chloe's office. Chloe looked up, surprised. "Richard, I wasn't expecting you. I just wanted to see what you've built," Richard said, glancing around the room. "It's impressive." Chloe studied him for a moment. He looked different, less defensive, more thoughtful. "You had a part in this," she said. Richard shook his head. "No, I was the villain in your story. I'm just trying to make amends." "You're trying," Chloe said. "That counts for something." Chloe's story continued to inspire. The lawsuit and its aftermath had become a symbol of standing up against injustice. Advocacy groups used her case as a rallying cry for better protections for workers and vulnerable communities. Even nationally, discussions about homelessness and veteran support gained momentum. Politicians cited Chloe's actions as an example of what grassroots compassion could achieve, leading to new funding for shelters and mental health services. Chloe, however, remained focused on her work at Hope Horizon. She turned down offers to write books or appear on talk shows, preferring to keep the spotlight on the issues, not herself. One evening, Chloe was invited to a gala honoring community leaders. She reluctantly agreed to attend, feeling out of place among the polished attendees and glittering decor. When her name was called, she approached the stage, her nerves steadied by the familiar faces of Jackson, Ava, and others in the crowd. "Kindness isn't just about grand gestures," Chloe said as she accepted the award. "It's about the small, everyday choices we make to see each other, to care, and to act." "This award isn't mine, it belongs to everyone who chooses kindness." The applause was deafening, but Chloe's focus was on the people she worked alongside every day, the ones who made real change possible. One afternoon, Chloe received an email from a name she hadn't seen in years, Melissa Miller, Jackson's ex-wife. Melissa wrote, "Dear Chloe, I've seen the incredible work you and Jackson are doing. I've never stopped caring about him, but I didn't know how to reach out. If he's willing, I'd like to reconnect." Chloe hesitated before bringing the message to Jackson. "It's your choice," she said gently. Jackson stared at the email for a long time before nodding. "I'd like to see her again." Their reunion was tentative at first, but as they spoke, years of pain and misunderstanding began to fade. Melissa and their daughter, Gracie, became a part of Jackson's life again, adding a new chapter to his journey of healing. At Hope Horizon, Chloe noticed a young woman lingering near the entrance. She approached, recognizing the mix of hesitation and desperation in the woman's eyes. "Hi," Chloe said. "Can I help you?" The woman nodded, her voice trembling. "I read about you. I'm in a bad place. And I didn't know where else to go." Chloe smiled, extending her hand. "You've come to the right place. Let's talk." Moments like these reminded Chloe why she had fought so hard. Each person she helped was a testament to the power of compassion and resilience. Years later, Chloe stood at the grand opening of a new Hope Horizon facility. It was a sprawling campus, complete with housing, a community center, and job training workshops. The plaque near the entrance read, "Dedicated to Chloe Hart and all those who believe in the power of kindness to change the world." Jackson stood beside her, now a respected leader in the community. Maria Alvarez was there too, having become an advocate for workers' rights. Even Richard attended, standing quietly at the back, offering a nod of respect. As Chloe cut the ribbon, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her journey had been full of challenges, but it had also been rich with purpose and connection. That evening, Chloe sat with Jackson, reflecting on the journey they had shared. "Do you ever think about how all this started?" she asked. Jackson smiled, with a plate of eggs and a cup of coffee. Chloe laughed softly. "It's funny, isn't it, how something so small can lead to something so big?" Jackson nodded. "It's not just about the food. It's about the choice to care when you didn't have to." As they watched the sun set over the city, Chloe felt a deep sense of peace. She had learned that kindness wasn't just an act, it was a legacy. And it was a legacy that would continue to ripple through the lives of everyone it touched.